I think Magic was in such a unique position. These other trading card games started from a position of being in addition to an IP.
Yeah.
Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Digimon, Lorcana. All of these things are, it's this IP that already exists, and it's that card game for that thing.
Distraction makers.
If we look at the foundations of Magic, at the most basic level, Magic is a game about resource management. But if we give those resources a little bit more granularity, we have mana, which is the thing to play your cards. We have the cards themselves, which is your sort of card advantage, your card resource, and you have life points. And life points are sort of the way whether you're going to win the game or not, or whether you're going to win or lose. And we look at these foundational structures of the game, and all three of these things can sort of have positives or negatives, right? Like life can go up or life can go down. You can draw cards or you can discard cards. You can gain mana or you can lose mana. And each of those resources being turned in those different directions, we often call these knobs. In this instance, it's probably something a bit more foundational than a knob, but we'll just stick with knobs. You can turn these things either direction. When you do that, you evoke different feelings, like feelings of I'm drawing a card. Well, what does drawing a card feel like? It feels like discovery. It feels like gaining knowledge. It feels like gaining resources. When you switch to the other side of it, of discarding a card, you start to get those feelings of losing knowledge. Like, let's say your opponent discards a card.
Yeah.
That feels violating. That feels like you are entering their space, their sort of sacred zone, things that shouldn't necessarily be interacted with, and you're interacting with it directly. Especially stuff like Thoughtseize or whatever, right? Where it's like, show me your whole hand, I get to pick something and you discard it.
Yeah.
And so you have this positive and this negative, and it's sort of like, okay, well, where do these fit in terms of flavor? How do they make you feel? And when you start to look at the things in that way, you start to get the foundations of the colors. We could do the same thing with life, right? Life can go up, life can go down. Life goes up, you're gaining life. You're being healed, right? Okay, well, that ends up in sort of white territory. From this sort of foundational look at how the systems of the game inspire the flavor of the game, we kind of start to look at, well, how is this different than other game design? Right.
Because I think chances are that, yes, Richard, when he's designing this game initially, he's talked before, and if you've read Characteristics of Games, has talked about what he calls the conceit of a game. And you can start a game in any one way of finding the narrative or the theme or the conceit, or you start from a mechanical structure. We talked about how it's probably started from a mechanical standpoint. And a lot of other games do the same thing from a TCG. They initially come at it from the stance of, I want to make a trading card game. And depending on, how much additional thought or extra innovation goes into the system beyond trading card games, most of the time there's usually some sort of a quantifiable end point. So that's a point system. It could be a life total. Could be victory points, security stacks, whatever it is.
You need some way to measure the end of the game. You could have a state that is either you've won or you've lost, but having granularity is usually something that you want so people can tell how close they are to winning or losing the game.
Right. And then you have a deck of cards, usually, and you have resources. Now, the resource system is usually the thing that a lot of people have played around with, especially post-Magic, and a lot of people are, wanting to try and, fix Magic's resource problem. But that's besides the point. So those are usually those three knobs, regardless of whether it's Magic. It's like almost every TCG usually has some knob like that.
Right.
But what many other people do, I'm going to bring up the Digimon trading card game. I played Digimon for like a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. Played local tournaments and stuff like that. Nothing too serious, but I kept up with it. All right. And it was my first foray back into TCGs after not doing it for years. What I really liked about Digimon, obviously, is all the other things that most people like about TCGs. It's addicting. We got into Lorcana not that long ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And we don't love the flavor of Lorcana. I'm not a Disney, but I really like TCGs still. I like that whole combination and figuring out decks and doing all that is really fun. But Digimon has these same knobs that you turn. They use 6 colors instead of 5, so it really does have exactly one positive, one negative of each knob that can be associated with the colors. But those colors make no sense.
Right.
You have purple Digimon, and they mess with the graveyard, and they do some discard stuff. But it's like, what does that really mean? Right. They're not purple. The frame is purple. They look a little evil in the art. But you could have a purple Agumon, or you could have a red Agumon, or you could have a green Agumon.
Right.
It doesn't really matter because it's just numbers, it's just abilities, because it's so crunchy, it's so mechanics heavy that I think my favorite example from early Magic was that they made a card. Is it murder? Terror. Terror.
Yep.
I like Terror as an example of this, because Terror could have just been destroy target creature, right?
Right.
But they were like, wait a minute. You can't terrify a robot.
Right.
You can't terrify another black creature.
Right.
And they just threw that in there.
Yeah.
And it's because of the flavor of what you are doing with that card.
It's the mechanical restrictions evoke a flavor. They evoke feeling, right? And you go, oh, that's so interesting that like my black spell doesn't work on other black creatures.
Right.
Why is that the case? And you start to sort of connect the dots in your mind as to like why that might be. And that tells a story. You are participating in the telling of that story.
Yeah.
I think Magic was in such a unique position. And it's so weird because, Magic has been, at this point, is very commodified. But these other trading card games started from a position of being in addition to an IP.
Yeah.
Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Digimon, Lorcana. All of these things are, it's this IP that already exists, and it's that card game for that thing. And so you're beholden to so much of that narrative and feeling or whatever it is that has already been created. It's not this pure mechanical expression that comes out of the systems of the game and then creating the story and the feelings after that and what comes out of those mechanics. It just sort of ends up being like, okay, well, what should Belle do? Well, Belle sings, so we're like a mechanic where the creatures can sing or whatever.
And I think Lorcana can get pretty flavorful with like, you have different characters. What's the Moana card in the first set that was like,
sure.
It just, you instantly kill like the bad guy of Moana.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, great. You have that flavorful card. It's cute. Did it ever see play? Like, it's never going to see play.
I mean,
right?
it could be a sideboard tech thing if Lorcana had sideboards. I don't think they do.
I don't know.
But, okay, so this is something that I think gets sort of misconstrued. And this is like coming down to like, I'm not going to speak entirely for you, but like my design philosophies in terms of what I look at as what I'm trying to get out of a game is that what ends up getting misconstrued is kind of this thing that you're bringing up is that, well, flavor is I have this character that's outside of the game that people know. I have this story outside of the game that people know. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to use that story to force a mechanical expression of that relationship. Where instead, it's the other direction, I think, is where things become much more interesting. And Terror is a great example.
So we talked, I'm sure we've talked about this in a past episode. We should probably do a whole episode where we just really take a deep dive into this at some point.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more crunchy game design talk.
Yeah.
I don't know how we talk about it with Magic. But something that we've talked about when it comes to game design, and in particular telling a story through a game, because games, whether people like it or not, tell a story. Right. Everything that you are doing in a game, through its actions, through its functions, is telling some sort of a story. And I think it's up to the designer to understand what that story is so that they can better emphasize that story, instead of just sort of like have that be an outcome of player actions. And where story starts is from a systemic level, right? So systems level would be drawing cards. It would be playing cards. It would be your resource system, whatever that is. That is telling a very specific story. And then, yes, what we're talking about with Moana, the Moana card from Lorcana, I hope you put it up on the edit so people know what we're talking about. But the Moana card that's a mechanics level story, right? That's the next level up. And so you playing that card and it saying the exact words of you kill this thing does tell a story, but does that feel like a systemic level of what you were doing as a pilot of this deck, for instance, right? And I think that what Magic does that I think it does really, really well, and other games do this too, for sure, but Magic obviously was the first, was that Magic tells the story of what you are feeling as the player. Yeah. And so if you are a red deck, right, what does it feel to be a red wizard? And not like in a general, all-encompassing term, but under the rules of Magic, what are they considering a red wizard? And it's chaotic, and it's wild, and it's aggressive, and all these things. And then how do you evoke that through the mechanics, right? You have the systemic idea, the systemic things that you do with mana, with drawing all those cards and stuff like that. Now, how do you evoke that through the mechanics of the game?
Yeah. How do you make someone feel like they're an aggressive red wizard?
Right. How do you make someone feel like an evil genius when they play blue or they play, whatever. Look, I feel
black. Blue black. Okay.
I was gonna say it could be blue black, but I feel that way with blue too. So okay.
Yeah, I feel like blue makes you feel like you know more than your opponent does, right? Like it's very much in this hidden information land of I know things my opponent doesn't know.
Right? Blue makes me feel like I'm a nerd bully, but I know that I am.
Yeah.
And so it's like I feel cocky but self-conscious at the same time. That's how I feel playing blue.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, man, I hope they don't realize how screwed I am.
This is an illusion.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the other thing that it's okay. So we're talking a little bit about Richard Garfield's Magic at this point. And when we start moving into Mark Rosewater's Magic, I think things get really interesting because he took the game, he took this idea, he took the beginnings of the seeds that Richard Garfield planted, and he ran with them. And he brought a writer's perspective to Magic. You know, we have this groundwork laid, and the game starts going more in this narrative direction before Mark Rosewater comes on.
Yeah.
We see things like Arabian Nights, and we see Ice Age. But what's interesting, Arabian Nights, almost the first Universes Beyond, like that's an IP in a way that exists outside of Magic that's being brought in. And I think one of the things, and I'm sure it was a lot of work, not just Mark, but I think one of the things that he really pushed for was sets that take us to different places and tell the stories of those places through the mechanics, through the feelings of the expressions of all these colors.
Yeah.
But how do these colors feel in that plane of existence?
Yeah. It's still a overarching like philosophical feel, right? Of what I was saying with red is wild, chaotic, aggressive, passionate, all those things, but under a different context, within a different world and plane.
And each of the colors sort of leans a different direction depending upon which plane you're on, because, the expressions of black in Kamigawa are different than in Kaldheim. We're seeing spoilers come out for, or previews come out for
Thunder Junction.
Yeehaw!
Yeehaw! Thunder Junction!
Oh, my God.
Pew, 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 pew. I'm Vraska!
Yeah. Exactly. You nailed it. So the thing that I am sort of concerned about is that when you start to take the way that all of these colors exist in different planes of existence and you start to sort of mix them all together in one place, some of this identity is clouded, right? Is that you don't feel like you have, we start to enter that territory of we have characters that we're designing for rather than characters being made for designs, right? Is that you move into this, well, this is Rakdos. This is how Rakdos is. And if we just get Rakdos all the time, how are we going to, one, get new interesting characters, but two, you start to enter this land of Rakdos's expressions of red and black are just all the time everywhere. And so these feelings of how the colors play get cloudy because Rakdos isn't the only way to play red. It's not the only way to play red and black even together. But if Rakdos is always there, that's going to be the expression of red and black. And I think that that is going to start to morph the game into this thing that we're kind of describing, where you're being led by the IP and you're not being led by the philosophy, the feeling.
It's hard to say. You know, We'll see. We'll see what the future holds. I think that there's enough people that are a part of the game that obviously understand how important the color pie is and how important the color philosophy is, and that they design for things based. And I also think that them having the Council of Colors now, with people that are designated to make sure that there is this separation and like homogeneous understanding of each individual colors.
Sure.
I think that's really important, and I think that they care about that and want to make sure that those identities aren't going to be watered down.
Oh, I'm not really worried about the color identities being watered down. I feel like this is the next step past that, right? Like when we start to define red and black as Rakdos, like that's what red and black is. And Ravnica in some ways, this is part of the reason we're going to have an episode about Ravnica, because it's literally the best Magic set ever made. But in so many ways, that idea of the guilds is really sticky.
Yeah.
And we've seen that come up time and time again now, where you try to make like Witherbloom and Strixhaven.
Yeah.
And it's
Golgari.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, this is just what, green and black do. And I'm like, well, you can move green and black into other things that they have in common and emphasize other things besides just the graveyard, which I think Witherbloom tries to do.
It's tough. I mean, going back to what you said in the beginning, is that it is a chicken or the egg situation when you're designing any game. And I think when TCG designers are doing that same thing, they have that same issue. They have that same problem, right? Like, are you going to design, for instance, with very, very systemic narrative goals in mind? Or are you going to take it as like, okay, this is a TCG, there's probably going to be a deck, there's kind of maybe life total is what we want to do instead of like some other sort of system or end goal or whatever. And so now we're just going to design, divide these mechanics in these different ways, and like those are the different factions or whatever. Like, I think that's what most people do nowadays. But I do think that what's kept Magic going for so long and what we admire about it is that it didn't just take those mechanical things and say, oh, okay, then like this color does these things, this color does these things, and there we go. And now we're all done. And instead it was, how does it do these things? Like, green doesn't gain life the same way that white gains life, right? That's really interesting. Black can also sometimes gain life, but how is that different, And I think that, honestly, I think it is one of the biggest lessons that not only TCGs should be able to take from Magic, because, one, I think it's surprising that other TCGs don't do this as often, because it seems like you should probably be thinking about things on that level. But
I think so much of the game design feels like you have narrative design and you have game design, and those two things are separate.
Yeah.
And when we look at, again, the games that inspire us the most, Shadow of the Colossus, Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Magic, these are games where those two things are inseparable.